Hey guys, Harrison back at it once again with a brand new video for you, and welcome to a very special video. Something I didn't normally do, but a ton of people were asking me for it, so I have absolutely no problem doing this. It is going to be a beginner's guide to the sport of MotoGP. I know a lot of people have been surprised and happy to see me follow it, but I know also a fair few of you have been saying, you know, could you talk a little bit more about the sport, or could you, introduce it a little bit more? And I thought that seems like a good idea, because I know a lot of people have been tweeting me and talking to me on the internet saying, it's been my first season watching and it's really, really good, and I'm glad I'm able to get new viewers into the sport. It's fantastic, just through the power of a YouTube account. So I thought, let me make this video on MotoGP, and let's see how it goes down. I mean, people might want a little bit more help, or a little bit more information before following it. So here we go. Now, let's get some basic info out of the way. It's an 18 race season. It coincides and links up quite often with the Formula 1 season, because it goes on pretty much in the exact same window, April to November. I know Formula 1 starts a little bit more in March because they have a 20 race calendar now, or in this season's case 19. But the calendars are pretty similar, but there's definitely some differences. Like, there's 3 American tracks over the course of a season. The brand new Grand Prix of the Americas they had last week. Laguna Seca, which obviously would never be fit for Formula 1, and Indianapolis, but they do Indianapolis in reverse, which is definitely a little bit more interesting. But they have some very unique tracks on the calendar, stuff like Brunel in the Czech Republic. They go to Aragon, so they have 3 Spanish tracks as well. So they have Catalunya, which you get in the F1 calendar, Aragon, and Valencia, which is always the big season finale. They go to Motegi instead of Suzuka for Japan. In Australia, they don't go to Albert Park, they have Phillip Island as a track. And they don't have Imola for San Marino, they have the Misano track instead. There's some other cool things, like the Sachsen Ring. They go to Mugello, which I would love to see F1 do one day, but apparently many of the drivers don't think it's safe enough, or something like that. And they also go to Le Mans, not the proper track, but it's just the extremely shortened version. I'll put a link in the description for the full calendar if you want to see exactly where everybody is, and all that stuff. So that's the basic calendar out of the way. Now I'm going to get into some of the technical stuff you guys may want to know. I'm not going to try and bog you down too much of information, but with a little understanding the bikes a little bit more. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about Moto 2 and Moto 3, the second and third tier classes, because let's be honest, we're all here for the big boys. Let's be real here. So, these bikes you're watching, they are V-twin, V4, or inline 4 engines. They have a number of cylinders. I think most of them, they're all 4-cylinder engines. They're all 4-stroke engines. They all rock about 240 brake horsepower. Now, I know what you're thinking. That isn't much. But, I mean, it isn't much, really. It's 240 1000cc engines in the top-level bikes. They're all 4-stroke. They're all 16-valve. But the thing is that what makes these bikes so fast is the extreme lack of weight compared to Formula 1. A 4-cylinder bike in MotoGP in 2010 will weigh about 150 kilograms. Once you throw in a 9 or 10 stone rider on top of that, you're looking at about 210, 220 kilos, maybe at the heaviest, all in, because these MotoGP riders are really small. Like Danny Pedrosa, he's about 16 ounces. So, these bikes are very, very light overall, and they're capable of massive top speeds. I mean, if you were watching the Circuit of the Americas last week, the top speed achieved was by Andrea Dovizioso on the Ducati bike. He hit 215 miles an hour, which is insane speed. I mean, you're getting more than what some of the Formula 1 cars were getting down there in the Circuit of the Americas. And I know Formula 1 cars are higher calibrated. A lot of people have asked me, are these bikes faster than Formula 1 cars around the track? No, they're not. 4 wheels will always be better than 2. Obviously, the larger surface area and more wheels means you're going to get way more grip in a Formula 1 car than a MotoGP bike. But what MotoGP bike's biggest strengths are in relation to that is its incredible mid-range acceleration and the amount of torque it's generating. Like I said, you can work it out. With 240 brake horsepower and a bike weighing about 200 kilos, including the rider, you're looking at about 1,200 brake horsepower per ton, which is twice as much as you get in a Bugatti Veyron, and they have 1,000 brake horsepower. So you can see, maybe not 0 to 60 because they're about the same. They're about 2.5 seconds to 60. But that mid-range acceleration, maybe from 100 to 180 miles an hour, is off the charts. That's why they can generate such massive speeds coming off these bigger straight tracks, like in Aragon, like in America, and other tracks like that as well on the calendar, like Mugello as well in Catalonia. They're reaching ridiculous speeds down these massive straights. It's crazy. And you know, they can also rev to the same kind of levels that you get in Formula 1, like 17.5, 18,000 RPM. Formula 1 cars, I think, are about the same, about 18 to 19,000 as well. So they're all pretty ridiculous in terms of power. But yeah, don't get me wrong, this is absolutely the premier class of motorcycle racing. So, I mean, you know, that's some of the basic, you know, mechanical specs you'll get in there. Fuel tanks are about 21 litres. It's not much at all. Oh, by the way, just a quick correction. MotoGP bikes are now, the minimum weight is now 160 kilos, so it's a little bit more than what I was telling you. But they have 21 litre fuel tanks, which means the bikes are capable for running for about 50 minutes at a time. That's how long a MotoGP race tends to be. It's about half of what you get, or about maybe 50 to 60% of what you get in a Formula 1 race, depending on the track. So you're looking at about 50 minutes for a race. So for example, I think Laguna Seca is a 32 lap race. If it was Formula 1, it would probably be something more like 70 to 80, like Monaco would be, for example, or, you know, something like that. So most MotoGP races are about 20 to 30 laps of a track, and the tracks do tend to be a little bit longer, like maybe 90 seconds to just under 2 minutes for a lap, depending on the track. So luckily, they're easier to watch races-wise because they're shorter. They're only about 50 minutes rather than like an hour 20 to an hour 40 for a Formula 1 race. Now, talking about the types of bike you'll see on the grid. There's several manufacturers, but they're split into 3 main categories. And this is what will help you out here, because this is a big one to bear in mind, because there's very separate teams here. There are factory teams, there are satellite teams, and there are CRT teams. Okay? Now, the factory teams are at the top of the tree. The factory teams are the ones that are being funded by the manufacturers of the bikes themselves. There are 3 factory teams in MotoGP. There's the Yamaha factory racing team, there is the Repsol Honda team, and there's the Ducati team. They just call themselves Ducati team, literally. It's a very boring name. But these 3 manufacturers are getting all their parts, all their technology, and all their developments directly from the manufacturers themselves. So they are pouring money into it just to be in the sport. And they know that because basically they're the top of the tree. They are the fastest bikes in the world, and they have technological advancements that other bikes just don't have. Like some of the stuff you'll see in MotoGP, you may end up buying on a bike in a production line or in a showroom, like in 3 or 4 years' time. They are the pinnacle of motorcycle development. And these teams have massive budgets, like $50 to $100 million over the course of a season. And of course, all the best riders in the world want to be on a factory bike. Maybe except the Ducati one, which is still like a bit crappy, but for the most part, it is the pinnacle of MotoGP. I'll talk more about their major players on those bikes in a little bit, but that's the key thing. The differences between the factory teams and the mid-tier satellite teams is that the satellite teams are all funded by other people's sponsors. They're not directly funded by manufacturers. They are funded by big sponsors, like for example the Monster Yamaha Tech 3 team, or the Pramac racing team, for example. They're not funded by manufacturers, they're funded by individual sponsors. So they will flip the bill for everything. They also, pardon me, sorry. They also get a lot of their parts from the factory teams, but they're like hand-me-downs basically. So, you know, some of the stuff you'll see in the factory bikes will eventually, 2 or 3 races later, might pass their way down to the satellite teams. Like I said, like Monster Yamaha, like Pramac, like Gresini Honda or LCR Honda, for example. You know, eventually they'll go back down the line to the satellite teams. So they're not getting the best parts first, but they will get them eventually. So for the most part, the satellite teams are always a little bit behind the ones in the factory teams. unless they have a rider who is really, really capable of pushing that bike beyond its expectations. There's a prime example of one of those I'll get to in a minute. But then comes the more interesting CRT division. Now, a lot of people have asked me about this because, like, why is like the second half of the grid so much slower than the first half? To explain, MotoGP was going through a bit of a crisis a couple of years ago. Two major factory teams pulled out of the sport, Kawasaki and then Suzuki. They both pulled out because they didn't think it was financially viable to keep running in MotoGP when they weren't getting any major success. So they pulled out of the sport, and the number of bikes on the grid dropped dramatically. Like, it used to be 25 or so. Like, in 2011 you had 25 bikes on the grid. By the end of 2012 you had 15, so everybody was scoring a point before the race even started. So, you know, MotoGP was on the brink of extinction because teams didn't want to take part in the sport because it was too expensive. You know, buying a satellite team and, you know, going through the road of, you know, buying engines and buying spare parts and then trying to develop the bikes faster to keep up in the development race, it was way too expensive. So there were teams putting out left and right. So MotoGP had to get with the times, and they had to devise something to try to encourage teams to get back into the sport. So what they did is they created a new type of bike and a new type of division called the CRT bikes, which is short for claiming rule teams. Now, what these manufacturers do and what these teams do, what they're allowed to do, is they're allowed to essentially build their own bike. So they might take the chassis from a Yamaha or an old Yamaha, or they might take the exhaust from a Ducati, or they might take the engine from a Honda, etc., etc. You see what I mean? It's basically a bit like, you know, a bit like going to a pick and mix. Like, you can basically essentially build your own bike, and it's pretty cool because it's so much cheaper to do than being a factory or a satellite team. Yes, the bikes are a little bit slower. They're maybe like a second to 2 seconds, maybe a little bit more laps slower than the top tier of factory or satellite teams. But it is much cheaper, and it has definitely helped get more teams into the sport. There's now 4 or 5 CRT teams in the field now, like the Avintia Blueson's team, the Ioda Racing Project team, Paul Bird Motorsport with Johnny Hernandez and England's own Michael Laverty, and the biggest of the CRT teams, the Power Electronics Aspar team with Randy Lapunier and Alex Espargaro in them. So that was a great way for MotoGP to avoid the crisis, because CRT bikes also get larger fuel tanks, and they're allowed to change their engines 12 times a season rather than the factory bikes. They're only allowed 6. So they're basically encouraging teams to develop the bikes faster as well by giving them more flexibility on things like engine issues and fuel tanks. So over the course of a season, they will definitely get better. So, just to explain what the CRT bikes are and how they basically came to play, now to talk about the major players. So the top tier guys in the sport, if you haven't been watching, or if you're watching now, the ones to look out for on the 2 factory teams, because basically almost every race weekend comes down to either Yamaha Factory Racing or Repsol Honda. They're the 2 best teams in the sport by some distance, and those 4 riders will be in or around the top every single race. On the Yamaha side, you've got the dream team of Valentino Rossi, who's a 7-time MotoGP world champion, arguably the greatest to ever enter this sport. The Doctor, as he likes to call himself. He is the biggest character in MotoGP, and he's probably the most famous name to ever come out of the sport. And the 2-time current and reigning world champion, and the #1 guy in the Yamaha factory team, which was kind of funny because a couple of years ago when Rossi was there, he was the #1, and now Lorenzo is. Jorge Lorenzo, who is a 2-time world champion and the current and reigning world champion as well, after beating Casey Stoner last season, Danny Pedrosa. Now, speaking of Danny Pedrosa, there's the Repsol Honda team. They are the team of Danny Pedrosa, who has been in or around the top ever since he entered the top class with Repsol Honda. He's been there his whole career. Just hasn't quite worked out for him. He's like the Andy Murray of MotoGP. He's been close, but he's never won the big one. And the new young upstarter and, you know, the big new star in the sport, Marc Marquez, who is only 20 years old and as he saw in America, broke the record that stood for 30 years. Is the youngest race winner in the history of the sport. As you can see, they are a very, very young, talented team. But Daniel Pedrosa's got something to prove, and Marc Marquez has already seemingly got the measure of him already. It could be quite scary if Marquez keeps beating him. Like, maybe Repsol will think that they want to cut bait with him and then move on. So those are the 4 guys to watch, because on any given weekend, those 4 have got a chance to win. There's a couple of other young players you may want to bear into mind as well. The Monster Tech 3 team, the Satellite team, are by a mile the best Satellite team on the grid, and they have Cal Crutchlow, who is getting better and better with every season. He's arguably the best British rider to enter MotoGP ever. He's a terrific rider. He is multiple times he's come on the podium. He's not quite had that race win yet, but he's had multiple 3rd places, and he has had a knack of beating factory teams before. So if anybody can crack that field of 4, it's going to be Cal Crutchlow. And he's got his partner Bradley Smith, the young rookie. He's a little bit further back down the order, but he's still getting used to the sport. Other Satellite teams like the Pramac team have Ben Spies, who came from AMA for the American fans, and Andrea Iannone. Other guys to mention, Stefan Bradl in his 2nd year, another one of the top level Satellite bike riders as well. The young German is ridiculously good. And another one to look out for is the Gresini Honda team with Alvaro Bautista and Brian Starrin, who's another rookie. But don't forget the other factory team, Ducati. They're a little bit further behind. They'd like to tangle it more with Satellite teams. They have Andrea Dovizioso, who used to be at Repsol Honda, and Nicky Hayden, who is a former world champion with the Repsol Honda team as well. So those are some of the major players to look out for. Also, look out for Alex Espargaro, who's who's probably the top level of the CRT riders. They have like a little separate league table for CRT teams, which is also pretty cool. Espargaro is the reigning CRT world champion, with his partner Randy de Punier, who's on the Aspar team. So look out for Espargaro. The guy is seriously talented, and he's even beaten guys on factory bikes before. So if anybody can do it, he can. So those are pretty much all the major boxes I can think of ticking off for MotoGP. Now, if you want to know more, please, I encourage you to drop comments drop comments on the video, and I'll do my best to answer them. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will catch you guys later. I hope you enjoyed the video. I really hope you appreciate it, and I'll catch you guys later. Thanks very much for watching, and sayonara.